International Jazz Day recently celebrated with many musicians and artisans paying homage to the greats who helped build the genre into its current global relevance. Lloyd Allen has more from those celebrating right here at home.
International Jazz Day is a day that is celebrated around the world, recognized by the UN, and it's to celebrate, jazz and its contributions to music and culture as a whole. Celebrating musicians like Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, all the greats.
Local jazz band, the Central Drive Collective, among the list of groups that performed at the National Art Gallery this past week during the International Jazz Day concert titled Intertwined. Member Mancy Campbell explains the group's sound.
We all grew up playing music, and we found common, place in jazz music. So we specialize in jazz, of course, R&B, soul, hip hop, and we find a way to intertwine those genres.
He says the experience celebrates music inspired by the sound of jazz.
Energy, excitement, passion for the music, young people doing positive things and doing it at a high level. We have veterans joining us, Dion Turnquest and Tina Richardson on saxophones. They're going to be joining us, along with Gerard Adams on trumpet. We're just going to be, sharing our music.
Group singer Trish Cunningham says they've also prepared a few numbers just for the locals.
We'll be covering not only jazz standards, but we will also be covering Bahamian music with its own arrangements done by persons in the group here, Christoph, Mansa, Sean Cunningham. You will definitely hear it through the vocalists that we have joining us on stage as well.
Operations manager at the National Art Gallery, Ahmad Roll, says celebrating jazz ties in with art lovers, so collaborating with Central Drive Collective and others was a no-brainer.
We don't only want people to feel like we're only accessible for visual art, but also for all the creative disciplines. So that's definitely why we wrapped our arms around them and we were like, let's make this happen.
A cultural pop-up, also a highlight at that event.
The host, Christophe DeVoe, we went to high school together, so it was a great opportunity to come back and just be with him, one, and then also just to share the music space and the art space together, because the arts are holistic.
With a good mix of spirits, food, and jazz lovers, the event proving a high hitter. For the Bahamas Tonight, I'm Lloyd Allen.
Well, thanks, Lloyd, and that does it for the Bahamas Tonight. Thank you for continuing to make ZNS your first choice for news and information. Only the sun covers the Bahamas better than ZNS. From all of us here at ZNS, thank you for watching and good night.
You're watching the ZNS Network, the People's Station.
Let me say good evening to all, and it is wonderful to be with you here tonight. I'm very pleased to see so many friends here, including some who first welcomed me here when I was a young lawyer. I'm counting on them, I'm counting you all being very polite tonight, not to point out how long that was. And those were, as I call, very happy and productive times in those years. Living and working here gave me a strong and enduring connection to this island and to her people, and a real understanding of why Grand Bahamians insist, no matter the disappointments and heartbreaks which have accumulated over the years, that Grand Bahama is unique and that your best days still lie ahead. I understand and I agree. That's why I'm here tonight. I know there's a lot of interest in recent developments. I'm grateful for this opportunity to share with you how we arrived at this moment, how we view the stakes of the current situation, and how the participation of licensees and community stakeholders will be crucial in building the best path forward. I will not review in great detail the history of Freeport and the Grand Bahama Port Authority, both because that history is well known to many of you, and because I know you are here to focus on the future, not the past. But if you'll permit me a brief look backwards, I do believe history has something to teach us, because even in the earliest years of Freeport's history, following the 1955 signing of the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement, both the promise and the peril of that arrangement were apparent. After all, the agreement was forged between a colonial government and an American businessman. The government did not have the resources to develop Grand Bahama into a full-fledged economy, and so offered extraordinary concessions to those who did, ceding significant sovereignty to foreigners looking to turn profits. People like us and people in this room were neither present nor meaningfully represented in the rooms where this agreement was negotiated. Yet, there can be no question that the arrangement allowed Freeport to develop quickly in ways that would have otherwise been impossible. The long-term tax concessions and development rights gave major players the confidence to build a deep water harbor and the infrastructure necessary for turning a sparsely populated island into a significant economic center, one that soon boomed with activity and industry. Not every initiative in those years succeeded, but many did. And where there had once been only pine barrens, there were roads and factories and opportunities. That's what a public-private partnership can deliver. But the perils of ceding authority to investors with no particular commitment to our people or country, those were also present nearly from the start. The oil terminal and refinery, the huge cement plant, those churned out huge profits for their private owners and operators while polluting our air and water. The 1955 agreement specified that the Port Authority was responsible for the education of Bahamians living within Freeport's boundaries. Perhaps not coincidentally, the vast majority of workers Bahamian workers, found themselves living outside of those boundaries. 99% of real estate sales in Freeport during those early years were to non-Bahamians. And 15 years in, only 155 of the 1,400 licenses were held by Bahamians. In 1965, a 1965 supplement to the original agreement granted the Port Authority an additional 150,000 acres for development on top of the original 50,000 acres, but required that they build 1,000 units of low and middle income housing within the concession area. A Royal Commission of Inquiry report published several years later found that the port had not lived up to this obligation, nor the obligation to invest in local farming projects. In July 1969, Prime Minister Premier Lyndon Pindling spoke at the official opening of BORCO, the Bahamas Oil Refinery Company. The speech he gave that day has long been considered consequential. His stirring language asserting authority over immigration and work permits in Freeport was viewed by many as a critical reason the city never again grew at the same pace. He did not mince his words, saying, "In this city where, regrettably, almost anything goes, where promisingly some economic opportunities have come to Bahamians, Bahamians are nevertheless still the victims of an unbending social order, which, if it now refuses to bend, must now be broken." I have no doubt that he was as furious as his words suggested. He and his generation fought for dignity and justice, for majority rule and independence. They fought and won. Yet, the second biggest Bahamian city was run by non-Bahamians. The segregation and the degradation was so terrible that observers compared conditions to apartheid South Africa. Undeniably, his words had revolutionary undertones. Yet, Sir Lyndon was a pragmatist as well as a patriot. He said those words while welcoming a major foreign new investor, not by storming the barricades, but welcoming a major new foreign investor. Do any of you fault him for having the courage to point out that the canals built by the developers had deprived local communities of the clean, fresh water that they always relied upon? Was the bend or break speech, as it came to be known, responsible for the subsequent decline of Freeport? Or was it the worldwide recession, which began that year and deepened the next, more to blame? Perhaps one day economists and historians will address this question with empirical rigor. I raise his speech tonight not to make claims about its economic impact in that era. Instead, I'm making a claim that the reaction to that speech, made 55 years ago, continues to echo today. Because in the decades that followed, it became conventional wisdom, an article of faith, especially among Bahamian elites, that it is too risky for the Bahamian government to insist that the Port Authority live up to its Hospital Creek obligations. Elected representatives of the people who have challenged the Port Authority to do more have been chastised for their impertinence, warned that they would be responsible once again, killing the magic and scaring away investors. Tonight I ask, have the decades of deference delivered you the promised land? Where's the magic? Where's the prosperity that's supposed to be the reward for submission? How many Bahamians have been enriched and empowered enough to justify the billions in concessions? Maybe the problem is not that successive governments have not asked too much from the Port Authority, but rather that governments have asked for too little. You know, I've had enough of the scare tactics. Now I have had the distinct privilege of serving as your Prime Minister for a little more than 2.5 years. In that time, I worked with my colleagues to promote our nation and our national interest relentlessly, building alliances across the world, fighting for fair climate justice and finance, fighting to get us off the blacklist, fighting for fair treatment, working to make sure our voice and our interests are represented. Tell me something. Does it make sense to you that we would fight for you around the world but not fight for you here at home? I don't mean to imply that we came in looking for conflict. I come in peace. Everyone and anyone who knows me knows I start with consultation and cooperation, not confrontation. But I'll say by July of 2022, I decided to meet with the main shareholders of the Port Authority myself. I let them know that we didn't intend to let the stagnation and the deterioration of Grand Bahama continue, and that we were prepared to enforce the reimbursement clause of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. In fact, the way I put it was that the Bahamian people and I, as Minister of Finance, could no longer afford to subsidize the Port Authority. Thereafter, a month later, in August, we followed up with a letter advising that we planned to send the first invoice for reimbursement in October 2022, which we did on the third day of that month. Now, pardon me for walking you through details here. I just want to establish that the Port Authority had more than ample notice, and yet they still felt no compulsion to persuade us they intended to be true partners for progress. Just look at the facts. Look at the breaches in the seawalls along the Grand Lucayan waterways. Look at the unusable public ramps fishermen need to lower their boats into the water. Look at the erosion of the public beaches. Look at the area some call the ghetto, just yards away from the Pink Building. Look at the bridge leading to East Grand Bahama, still not fully repaired. Downtown Freeport was dead for 20 years, with empty lots and shuttered and derelict buildings. It is our administration that's going to bring downtown back. We are addressing the dysfunction and all the legacy issues that has been neglected. And you know, some things are really a big deal to me. They sold West Sunrise Highway between the International Bazaar and Princess Properties. They sold a highway to a private developer, leading to the bazaar's destruction, I think. During Dorian, they opened a non-profit to distribute donations sent by others. All the decades of concessions, and that is what they just contributed when we were at our lowest moment. Let's talk about some home repairs for a moment. Do you know that there have been multiple cases where the government has tried to help with home repairs, but we have been blocked to help, insisting that the workers cannot do so because they're behind on licensing fees or service charges, and these are small home repairs. How can people who behave like this be good partners? Now, this is not to say that the entity Port Authority can't be good partners. We want them to be good partners, but I just need to highlight what is facts. There's just too much evidence that they care more about their infighting and shareholder lawsuits than our people. This is what happens when cities are treated like family heirlooms passed down without a thought as to whether those inheriting are willing to serve the interests of our communities over their profits. They have divested themselves of key assets, sold for profits, the very assets that would allow them to develop the economy of Freeport, as they are required to do by law. The road building company has been sold, the harbor company has been sold, the utility company, the power company, even the sanitation company. They were happy to offload the airport to my predecessor, who somehow consented for the Bahamian taxpayer to take on the liability of rebuilding the airport, whilst the insurance money for the damage caused by Dorian went somewhere. When the Port Authority owned all of these assets, they had a credible argument to make to investors. But what do they have now? Now they appear primarily to be in the license fee collecting business. That's fine. I don't know what they did with all the money they made from selling off all those companies, but I know what they didn't do. They didn't invest in the climate resilient infrastructure Grand Bahama needs in this new climate era of intensifying hurricanes. Speaking of selling off these critical subsidiaries, selling off these critical subsidiaries, I don't recall them asking those of you who are licensees for your consent. I don't know, they may have. Yet any material change in the Hospital Creek Agreement requires 4/5 approval of licensees. They're leaning on you, collecting your fees, but they've sold off the assets that will allow them to bring the kind of game-changing investments that are so overdue in Grand Bahama. They haven't kept their obligations to you, and they haven't kept them to the Bahamian taxpayers more broadly either. As I alluded to earlier, when the government pays the salaries of the many people delivering public services within Freeport, the port is responsible for reimbursing the government for any amount spent beyond the customs taxes paid in the port. In my meetings with them, I was clear. Whatever has transpired in the past, my government is not prepared to subsidize your private profits with public money. The Port Authority's position is that this provision has never been enforced. Our position is that this unfortunate fact in no way removes the obligation under the law. On the 26th of March, we sent the Port Authority an invoice covering the last 5 fiscal years, a detailed invoice of the accounting that says they owe $357 million. $357 million. The port's response, they owe nothing. The claim for $357 million was supported by a detailed audit prepared by the international firm PricewaterhouseCoopers. Their claim, they owe nothing, was supported by nothing. Our claim for $357 million is supported, as I said, by a detailed audit prepared by PricewaterhouseCoopers. Both parties are now proceeding along the mutually agreed upon path following the sunset of 30 days notification. But let me tell you something. Since March 26, none of the many investors we are working with across a range of projects here in Grand Bahama or on other islands have objected or retreated or raised any concerns or even raised an eyebrow over what is happening. That's because good investment partners don't fear governments who seek to enforce contract terms. So let's leave fear in the past. Let's go forward with confidence. Let's liberate Grand Bahama from the purgatory of unrealized potential. Unrealized potential. You've waited too long for vision and growth and innovation. From the Carnival Port to the shipyard expansion to a new MSC port, big things are finally in motion. Construction of the Freeport Health Campus, new hospital is underway. The airport is too. Yes, the Port Authority is the licensing entity, but we are doing the work, and none of the parties or public relations they're running now can erase a record of what I call neglect. We gave the Grand Bahama Port Authority extraordinary concessions. In return, we should get extraordinary growth. Instead, Grand Bahama's economy has lagged behind other islands, and this has been the case for the last 15 years or more. The Port Authority collects your license fees, but I dare say they long ago stopped earning them. I try to explain why the current shareholders are not more productive partners for Grand Bahama. It was not always thus. It was not always thus. I know, and I remember, and many of you remember, Sir Jack Haywood and Edward St. George with great respect and affection. Public-private partnerships can yield great benefits, benefits that otherwise would not be possible when the partners are the right ones, when the arrangement suits the times, and when the government is not afraid to stand on the side of their people. Like Sir Lyndon, I'm both a patriot and a pragmatist. The Bahamas has been battered by 4 Category 4 and 5 storms in under a decade. No one knows that better than you do. Those storms cost us billions, and the debt we had to incur to rebuild and recover is expensive, with interest rates that reflect our growing climate risk. We are paying for the hurricanes of the past and the hurricanes of the future. Just ask the insurance people. Anyway, check your premiums. They factor in the risk of future hurricanes in that. That's why I continue to say we are paying for the hurricanes of the past and the hurricanes of the future. We lost a lot of ground with the pandemic. The global inflation crisis hit our import-dependent islands hard. The vulnerability to external shocks means that the government does not always have resources to match our ambitions for our country. That's why we work hard to promote the Bahamas and to find world-class partners for the next stages of our development. Imagine what Grand Bahama could be if the licensees and the government has or have the right partners. You know what we have now that the licensees of the 60s and 70s did not? We have several generations of educated Bahamians who are now contributing their talents and expertise to enterprise and endeavors abroad. But who would gladly live and work here if they believed in the opportunities, if they believed they could build a safe and secure future here? I remember when Grand Bahama, Freeport, was called the Magic City. It wasn't just the investment that made it thrive. It was the energy and the ambition of young Bahamians who believed they could create something spectacular. That spirit hasn't vanished. It's just been stifled. It's time to unleash it once more. Every era brings new challenges and new possibilities. And when old arrangements do not serve, it is not just our right, but our obligation to ask, how can the people be better served? How can we close the gap between potential and reality? That brings me to all of you in this room. You are critical. You are critical to the way forward. Let me be clear. We will never take steps that water down any of the rights or privileges or benefits that you now enjoy. I repeat that. We will never take steps that will water down any of the rights, privileges, or benefits that you now enjoy. I have an open door policy. I have an open mind about what comes next. The only thing I'm not open to is the status quo. I started by saying I saw a great many old friends here. I hope soon to count many of you as new ones, as we work together to build a better way forward. You deserve a flourishing, thriving community. You deserve an inclusive economy that generates opportunity, dignity, and security. Let's restore the magic. Let's break the chains that have held us back for too long. Let's build a city that finally truly works, and it works for everyone. Thank you.